At 30,000 feet above the ground, a terrified dog begins barking uncontrollably at the door, separating two sections of a passenger plane. A flight attendant assumes the animal is simply nervous, but the moment she reaches for the controls, the dog suddenly retreats with its tail between its legs. Then a horrifying roar shakes the entire aircraft. The sound awakens Gerry, a former United Nations investigator resting near the front of the plane. Sensing something is terribly wrong, he slowly pulls back the curtain between the cabins. What he sees on the other side is worse than anything he could have imagined. The rear section has become a living nightmare. Passengers hurriedly pile luggage into the aisle, building a desperate barricade between themselves and the infected. For a few seconds, the wall holds. Then one poorly placed bag slips to the floor. The sound instantly attracts the creatures. They slam against the barrier with terrifying force. From the cockpit, the co-pilot panics and tries to leave his seat, but the captain orders him to stay. Behind them, the makeshift wall collapses, allowing the infected to flood the narrow cabin. There is nowhere left to run. With death charging directly toward him, Gerry spots one final option. Detonating a grenade inside an aircraft could kill everyone, but doing nothing guarantees the same result. Without hesitating, he pulls the pin. But how did Gerry end up trapped inside a plane filled with infected passengers? It all began 3 days earlier during an ordinary morning in Philadelphia. Gerry was sitting in traffic with his wife Karen and their 2 daughters. Military helicopters were passing overhead, while radio reports mentioned a mysterious outbreak of violent behavior linked to something resembling rabies. Then a police officer suddenly smashes the side mirror of their vehicle while racing past them. Gerry's old investigative instincts immediately warn him that this is not a normal traffic emergency. He steps outside, but before he can understand what is happening, a massive explosion erupts farther down the street. Another officer approaches from behind and orders him to return to his car. Before Gerry can react, an out-of-control truck tears through the traffic like a missile, crushing the officer and several vehicles in its path. The truck continues plowing through the city without slowing down. Realizing the danger is rapidly approaching, Gerry forces his way through the gridlocked cars. However, the streets are already descending into complete chaos. Vehicles crash into one another, people abandon their cars, and Gerry's vehicle is eventually struck as well. The family survives, but the world outside has transformed into a war zone. Among the fleeing civilians are countless infected people attacking anyone they can reach. These are not slow, mindless creatures. They sprint with terrifying speed, throwing themselves at victims like wild animals. During the panic, Gerry watches one man get bitten. He begins counting. Within only 12 seconds, the victim's body twists violently before he rises again as one of the infected. Gerry immediately understands the scale of the threat. If the infection spreads this quickly, entire cities can collapse within minutes. A wave of infected begins swallowing the street. Gerry and his family reach an abandoned recreational vehicle. After killing an infected attacker, they climb inside and escape the immediate massacre. But safety does not last long. The city is already falling, and Gerry's older daughter suddenly suffers an asthma attack. Her medication is gone, forcing the family to stop at a nearby store. Inside, panic has replaced civilization. Gerry and Karen split up, each protecting one of their daughters while searching for medicine and supplies. Gerry finds the inhaler, but before he can leave, he hears his younger daughter scream. He rushes toward the sound and discovers 2 armed looters holding Karen. Gerry shouts at them, but one man raises a weapon. Gerry reacts instantly, shooting him before he can fire. Moments later, a police officer appears. Gerry raises his hands, expecting to be arrested. Instead, the officer ignores the dead body and begins stealing supplies for himself. At that moment, Gerry realizes the truth. The infection has not only destroyed the city, it has destroyed law, order, and basic human decency. When the family exits the store, their vehicle is gone. Someone has stolen it. Gerry understands that remaining on the streets is no longer an option. He leads Karen and the children toward a nearby apartment building, while calling his former UN colleague, Thierry. Thierry promises to arrange a helicopter rescue the following morning. But Gerry must reach a high rooftop where the aircraft can safely land. The family arrives outside a tall apartment building, only for an infected body to suddenly crash onto the pavement from above. The impact creates enough noise to alert every infected person nearby. Gerry and his family race inside and lock the entrance. Almost immediately, violent pounding begins on the other side. They climb 7 floors before finding an apartment occupied by a kind Mexican family. Despite having limited food, the family allows Gerry, Karen, and the children to stay for the night. The following morning, Gerry asks them to join the evacuation. The father politely refuses, believing they will be safer inside their home. Gerry cannot force him to leave. Before continuing upward, Gerry prepares for close combat. He tapes a kitchen knife to the end of a mop handle, creating a makeshift spear. He also straps a thick book around his forearm to protect himself from bites. To prevent anyone from becoming separated, Gerry ties his family together with a rope. But the moment they leave, the infected break into the apartment behind them. At the entrance to the rooftop stairwell, Gerry opens a door and finds an infected attacker waiting on the other side. He drives the improvised spear into the creature, but the children's screams attract several more. The family races toward the roof as the infected charge up the stairs, knowing they cannot outrun them. Gerry gives the supply bag to Karen and stays behind to slow the creatures down. During the fight, infected blood splashes directly into his mouth. Gerry freezes. He believes he has just received a death sentence. Before another infected can reach him, a gunshot echoes through the stairwell. Gerry looks up and sees the young boy from the Mexican family. Somehow, the child survived the attack. On the roof, Karen activates a signal flare as the rescue helicopter approaches. But when Gerry reaches the rooftop, he does not run toward his family. Instead, he walks directly to the edge of the building and begins counting to 12. If he transforms, he intends to jump before he can hurt his wife or children. 12 painful seconds pass. Nothing happens. Gerry is not infected. There is no time to celebrate. Roars erupt from the stairwell as another swarm races toward the roof. Gerry sends Karen, the girls and the boy into the helicopter first, while the soldiers provide covering fire. Then Gerry sees something devastating. The infected man leading the swarm is the same father who gave his family shelter the previous night. The soldiers open fire, and several infected creatures fall from the rooftop. Gerry climbs aboard at the final second, allowing the helicopter to escape. 2 hours later, they land aboard the Argus, a military command ship positioned in the Atlantic Ocean. Thierry is waiting for them on deck, but the rescue comes with conditions. Inside the overcrowded command center, Gerry learns how quickly civilization has collapsed. The president is dead. Most major cities have been overrun, and the ship is already running dangerously low on food, fuel, and medical supplies. It may be floating, but it is slowly becoming a crowded graveyard. A senior military commander meets Gerry and explains why he was rescued. Intelligence reports suggest the outbreak may be connected to a U.S. military base in South Korea. A message was transmitted from the location, but all communication stopped immediately afterward. The military has assigned a talented virologist to investigate. However, they need someone capable of entering unstable regions, gathering evidence, and identifying the source of the infection. They need Gerry. He refuses at first, wanting only to remain with his family. The commander then makes the situation brutally clear. Space on the ship is reserved for essential personnel and their families. If Gerry refuses the mission, Karen and the children will be returned to the infected mainland that same night. With no real choice, Gerry agrees. His first destination is the military installation in South Korea, where the original message was transmitted. During the flight, the young virologist confidently explains his theory. Nature, he says, is a serial killer. Like every killer, it leaves clues behind. The answer to stopping the outbreak is hidden somewhere within the outbreak itself. The idea may hold the key to humanity's survival. Unfortunately, the scientist never gets the chance to prove it. The aircraft lands at the Korean base during a violent storm. The moment the doors open, infected creatures charge from the darkness, drawn by the noise. The virologist has spent his life studying deadly diseases inside laboratories. Faced with real monsters for the first time, he panics and turns back toward the plane. His foot slips on the ramp. The gun in his hand accidentally fires, killing him instantly. The man who was supposed to solve the outbreak is gone before the investigation even begins. Soldiers stationed at the base emerge and open fire, giving Gerry and the remaining crew enough time to reach the secured building. Gerry soon arrives at the location mentioned in the transmission, expecting to find a patient, a sample, or at least some evidence. Instead, the entire room has been burned to ash. The soldiers explain that the first infected person at the base was a missing soldier. When a military doctor attempted to examine him, the soldier attacked and infected the medical team. The warning message was the doctor's final transmission. To stop the outbreak, the surviving soldiers burned the entire room, destroying the infected man and every possible biological sample along with him. Gerry's only lead has vanished. As he prepares to leave, he notices a strange prisoner locked inside a metal cage. The man is a former CIA operative arrested for selling weapons. At first, Gerry assumes he is simply another criminal, trying to sound important. Then, the prisoner begins sharing information no one else seems to have considered. According to him, North Korea reacted to the infection within 24 hours. The government allegedly ordered the removal of every citizen's teeth. The method was horrifying, but the logic was simple. Without teeth, people could not bite one another, making transmission far more difficult. Gerry finds the story almost impossible to believe. The prisoner then gives him a far more useful lead. While most governments dismissed early reports as riots, disease, or mass hysteria, Israel acted before the global collapse. Its borders were sealed, and an enormous defensive wall was completed before infected populations reached the country. Somehow, Israel knew what was coming. With no evidence left in Korea, Gerry decides Jerusalem is his only remaining lead. Under heavy rain and constant threat from the infected, he and the surviving soldiers fight their way back to the aircraft. They take off and head directly toward the city everyone believes is still protected. But as the plane breaks through the clouds and Jerusalem appears below, Gerry is stunned by what he sees. While the rest of the world is being consumed, one city is still standing behind its walls. Against all odds, Jerusalem remains standing. Gerry soon meets the man mentioned by the former CIA operative, a senior Mossad official named Jürgen Warmbrunn. Gerry asks the obvious question: how did Israel know the outbreak was coming? Jürgen explains a strict intelligence policy known as the 10th man rule. Whenever 9 analysts study the same evidence and reach an identical conclusion, the 10th person must reject that conclusion and investigate the worst possible alternative. When reports began mentioning the dead attacking the living, every official dismissed them as nonsense. Jürgen was the 10th man. He assumed the impossible was real, and because of that decision, Israel completed its defenses before the rest of the world understood the danger. Inside the wall, survivors celebrate as though they have already defeated the outbreak. People sing, cheer, and welcome refugees through the gates. But in this new world, noise is practically an invitation to death. Outside the city, hundreds of thousands of infected gather against the wall. None of them understands what they are doing, yet they continue climbing over one another like a swarm of insects. Their bodies begin forming a living mountain. Gerry notices the pile rising higher and immediately realizes what is about to happen. He tries to warn the soldiers, but it is already too late. The first infected creature reaches the top and falls into the city. Seconds later, dozens follow, then hundreds. The wall that seemed impossible to breach becomes a waterfall of infected bodies. Panic erupts as the creatures tear through the supposedly secure zone. Jürgen orders one of his soldiers, Siegen, to get Gerry out of the city at any cost. As they move through the chaos, Gerry witnesses something strange. An elderly man stands directly in the path of several infected, yet they rush past him without attacking. Gerry notices it, but there is no time to investigate. The infection is spreading across the city within seconds. While the soldiers escort Gerry through a narrow passage, one of them is lifted into the air by the infected. Knowing he cannot be saved, the soldier pulls the pin from a grenade and sacrifices himself, destroying the creatures around him. The remaining team becomes trapped in an alley, with infected closing in from both sides. They break into a nearby building and barricade the entrance. Then Gerry sees the same impossible behavior again. A young boy stands among the infected, but none of them shows any interest in him. They move around the child as though he is not even there. 2 different people have now been completely ignored. Something about them is protecting them. Before Gerry can understand the connection, the infected break through the door. Believing the room is about to be overrun, Siegen looks around the corner. An infected lunges at her. She shoots it immediately, but when she lowers her weapon, Gerry sees bite marks on her hand. There is no time to hesitate. Gerry grabs her blade and cuts off her arm above the bite. He quickly wraps the wound while another soldier points a gun at Siegen's head. Gerry begins counting the seconds, waiting to see whether the infection has already spread. 12 seconds pass. Siegen screams in pain, but she does not transform. The amputation worked. The group escapes the building and heads toward a rescue helicopter. Before they can reach it, infected creatures begin jumping from the rooftops. They fall through the air like rain. Several land directly on the helicopter, overwhelming the aircraft with their combined weight. The pilot loses control, and the helicopter crashes before Gerry's team can board it. Their original military aircraft also abandons the city. leaving them trapped on the runway. Then, Gerry spots a civilian passenger plane preparing to leave. It is their only remaining chance. The surviving soldiers run onto the runway and aim their weapons at the cockpit. With the city collapsing behind them, the pilot has no choice but to stop and open the doors. Gerry and the badly injured Segan board the aircraft, which takes off moments before the infected reach it. Once the plane is safely in the air, Gerry opens a medical kit and begins cleaning Segan's wound, looking at the place where her hand used to be. The normally fearless soldier gives a bitter laugh and says she has become a burden. That single word triggers something in Gerry's mind. A burden. He remembers the injured soldier at the Korean base who stood unharmed among the infected. He remembers the weak elderly man in Jerusalem and the sick-looking child no creature attempted to attack. The infected were not simply failing to notice them. They were deliberately avoiding them. Suddenly, every clue connects. Gerry rushes to the cockpit and explains his theory to the pilots. If he is right, humanity may finally have a way to survive. The pilots change course and head toward a World Health Organization research facility near Cardiff, Wales. No one knows whether the laboratory is still operational, but it is the only location where Gerry can test his idea. 6.5 hours later, the plane enters Welsh airspace. That is when a small dog begins barking violently near the rear cabin door. The strange behavior leads directly to the horrifying moment seen at the beginning. An infected passenger attacks from the rear section, and the infection spreads through the plane within seconds. Passengers desperately stack luggage between the cabins, but the barricade collapses. With the infected charging toward him, Gerry pulls the pin from a grenade. The explosion tears open the side of the aircraft. A violent rush of air drags several infected passengers through the opening, but the blast also damages the plane beyond control. The aircraft begins falling from the sky. It crashes deep inside the Welsh countryside, ripping through trees before breaking apart across the forest floor. When Gerry regains consciousness, pain shoots through his entire body. He looks down and discovers a sharp piece of metal buried in his abdomen. He pulls himself from the wreckage before collapsing. Segan has also survived. Although both are badly injured, they support one another and follow the direction the pilot gave them before the crash. After walking through the forest for hours, they finally reach the WHO facility. Gerry collapses outside the entrance. When he opens his eyes again, 3 days have passed. Doctors have treated his wound, but he is tied to a hospital bed while 2 suspicious researchers question him. They found a satellite phone in his belongings but have no idea who he is. Gerry asks them to contact Thierry at the United Nations. The call confirms his identity, but Gerry also receives devastating news. Because he disappeared for several days, the military assumed he was dead. Since his family was only allowed to remain aboard the command ship because of his mission, Corinne and the children were removed. They were transferred to a refugee camp in Nova Scotia, Canada. Gerry is furious, but anger will not bring them back. Before he can reunite with them, he must prove his theory and survive. Once the scientists trust him, they take him into the main laboratory. There, Gerry explains what he witnessed. The infected behave like highly selective predators. They do not attack everyone. They target healthy bodies capable of spreading the infection. People suffering from terminal illnesses, serious diseases, or major physical weaknesses appear useless to the virus. Instead of infecting them, the creatures simply move past them. The scientists begin to understand the possibility. A healthy person could temporarily disguise themselves by becoming infected with a treatable disease. The infected would see that person as an unsuitable host and ignore them. It would not cure the outbreak, but it could provide camouflage. The theory sounds possible, yet there is a major problem. The diseases required to test it are stored in another section of the facility. That wing is now occupied by more than 80 infected employees. Someone must enter the contaminated area, recover the samples, and test the theory on a living person. Once again, Gerry volunteers. Segan and one of the doctors join him. They wrap books and tape around their arms for protection, then arm themselves with metal bars and an axe. Moving as quietly as possible, the 3 enter the infected wing. The creatures stand motionless throughout the corridors. As long as no one creates noise, Gerry's team can pass directly in front of them. They nearly reach the storage room, but at the final corner, the doctor accidentally strikes his metal bar against the wall. The sound echoes through the entire hallway. Every infected person nearby instantly turns toward them. The creatures charge. Gerry stays behind and repeatedly strikes the railing, pulling most of the infected toward himself. His distraction gives Segan and the doctor enough time to escape in the opposite direction. Gerry manages to stay ahead of the swarm and reaches the sample storage room. Inside, dozens of containers hold different bacteria and viruses. He does not have enough medical knowledge to identify the right one, so he fills a case with everything he can reach. Then he turns toward the exit. An infected man is standing directly outside the glass door. It is the only way out. Gerry looks at the unknown samples and realizes there is only one way to test his theory. He must infect himself with one of them. Before taking the risk, he writes a final message for Karen and his daughters. Then he selects a vial at random, fills a syringe, and injects the substance into his arm. Gerry waits inside the room for an hour. If the sample is lethal, he may die alone. If his theory is wrong, the infected creature outside will kill him the moment he opens the door. After enough time has passed, Gerry picks up the case and unlocks the glass door. The infected man approaches until his face is only inches away. He smells Gerry and violently clicks his teeth. For a terrifying moment, it appears the theory has failed. Then the creature turns away. Gerry has become invisible to the infected. But one encounter is not enough to prove it. He walks toward a vending machine, calmly selects a drink and opens it. Then he forces the machine open, sending cans crashing across the floor. The noise awakens every infected person in the building. A massive swarm rushes directly toward him. Gerry remains still. The creatures split around his body and continue running past him. To them, he is no longer a suitable target. His theory is correct. Gerry calmly walks through the infected crowd and returns to the laboratory. The scientists immediately identify the substance he injected and administer the correct treatment. Fortunately, the sample contains a curable bacterial infection rather than a deadly virus. With the camouflage method confirmed and the samples safely recovered, humanity finally has a weapon against the outbreak. It is not a vaccine, and it will not kill the infected, but it allows healthy survivors to move among them without being attacked. Gerry and Segan leave the WHO facility as laboratories begin producing treatments that can temporarily hide people from the infected. 60 hours later, Gerry reaches the refugee camp in Nova Scotia. After surviving collapsing cities, military bases, he finally sees Karen and his children again. The family embraces, but the war is far from over. Humanity has not defeated the infected. For the first time since the outbreak began, however, it finally knows how to fight back.